Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Nancy Drew. A great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, picking up after the last episode, it's like, okay, we found the Glaika's kryptonite. It's the sand that basically the sand is like, it represents like the porents that are basically the things that ended up killing her. So it's like we need to find that sand, those porents again, like, and the sand they turned into, and we could potentially use that as a weapon against her. Go and look for everything, but they can't because the seaweed thing that Nancy had before, it's like, where is it? She's like, I had it here. And it's like, oh, Bess threw it away. She was like, the feng shui was all over the place. She was like, honestly, like, I felt a lot better afterwards. George goes home and she's like, what? Mom clean? Like the one time mom cleans and she ends up getting up all the sand I need to defend myself from this deadly ghost that's coming after me. And obviously, George is trying to pretend like everything's okay with her. Because, like, the oldest of her younger sisters is like, hey, I'm making breakfast. Even George been like, you cooked? And she's like, yeah. And they're just kind of being like, oh, what's up with this? But, like, she's like, George is an octopus. And then, like, George, obviously because the last episode, knows what that's referring to. And she's like, no. Don't worry about it. Fine, we could just have breakfast together. It's just like, it's kind of a sad circumstance. Like, obviously, they're not all together as a family, but, I think you take what you will, especially because it's like, I think it was all meant to kind of, like, ease her, especially, like, the other two the youngest, they don't know what's going on, but, the oldest of the young ones know. So I think it's just like, I gotta do whatever I can to kind of make her feel okay, like, that things aren't going to be, bad like they are. But it turns out no one can find any sand, and it turns out the reason why is because Bess went on a little bit of a cleaning spree, and it's like, what? Why? It's just like, for her, it's like the feng shui. She thought like, the chi was off and everything, so she thought she was actually trying to help in her own way. But it's like, oh, but you wallow, and you want next time you want to help, don't wallow in your own self-pity. She's like, really? Me? You up here, you're acting like, Saint George. You're so worried. Like, you always act like your family is such a burden, but so many of us would kill to have what you have. Obviously, I'm sure in one case, like I'm sure in Bess's case, like obviously the only family she had left was her mom. So now that her mom was gone, like she has a Marvin's, but that's not a good enough substitute. Everyone's got their complicated family situations. Nancy's mom died. Now she finds out like, oh, her real biological mom is dead, died years ago. Her entire life. So it's like, but then it's like, whoa, don't snap at George. And then like, I love Ace saying the most confusing thing, like, that was a re-snap. You can't snap back at a re-snap. George snapped first. And it's like, but that's the sad thing. It's like in this moment and Nancy says, in the moment we're supposed to come together, we're tearing each other apart, Because like Ace is like, because it turns out like Ace had to work for McGinnis because he was covering up the fact that he had hacked into an FBI database. And it's like, why did you do that? And it's like, well, he doesn't have to tell his reasons. That's his business, which then Nick jumps on top of that. And it's like, oh, look at you. You're always one to try and, like how you operate. And the way he was saying like operate, it almost made it sound like, oh, what am I, kind of a machine or something, the way I operate? It's like that she, rather than dealing with stuff, she just kind of like uses people essentially. And then like Ace kind of breaks it down, be like, yeah, he's referencing the summer that they were together, that, it's also the summer that her mom died. It's like, I'm sorry my mom died. Like, because I also thought that was BS. Like, everyone ganging up on her. Like, for one, Nick saying what he did. Like, everyone grieves in their own way. For you to kind of do that, like, I get it. It's a heightened moment. Everyone's upset. And it's just like a lot of shit was said, because Nancy's trying to be positive about it. And she's like, oh, I'm sorry I'm not like you, George. And fatalistic in a sense. They're just kind of being focused on the negative. But then you have Bess saying, hey, it's actually, this is on you. You did all this. This all came about because you wanted answers. You couldn't let the mystery go, and we ended up paying the price for it, And that is sad. To be fair, Ace had kind of chewed her out about it earlier in the season, but it is sad, to kind of have that thrown back in her face. She's like, fine, I'll do whatever it takes. I won't let any of you die. Like, more so than anything, that's always been Nancy's thing of, like, she wants to make sure that she made that promise at the end of the first episode of the season, being like, I'm going to make sure, first and foremost, it was protecting them, making sure they live, because she recognizes, like, I did drag you guys all into this. This is my fault that things played out this way, so I have to ensure that you stay alive. So she's going to investigate, which I love that, like, Drew and, God, I keep saying just Drew instead of just, like, Carson. Carson and Ryan are kicking it. I'm like, I love that this has become, like, a thing. You guys are, co-parenting to a certain extent. It's like, Ryan's like, oh, we should have bought binoculars or something. And then, like, you have Carson being like, binoculars, that would have been, like, the right thing to do. And he's like, is that obviously? And then Ryan's like, wait, is that obvious? He's almost, Carson's looking at him, I was like, how is that not obvious? He's like, yeah, my dad actually hired PIs to kind of track me down and stuff like that, keep tabs on me. He's like, really? Because even Carson's like, that's effed up. And he's like, well, yeah, but he was like, how'd you find out? I was like, Ryan's like, well, I paid the PI, offered him the right amount of money to kind of feed the wrong information to my dad. My dad eventually found out, but he almost was actually kind of proud of me. It was almost kind of like our thing. And I was like, that is a twisted relationship. Even Carson being like, I could give you like some parenting books. I don't know whether he was like trying to be like, oh, like, hopefully you handle things with Nancy a little differently, but also maybe parenting books to make him realize you and your dad have a very jacked up relationship. But I guess it's like at the same time, Carson can't really complain because like, considering where him and Nancy currently stand. So I just thought, but he was like, oh, you think I can do things differently? He's like, yeah. You have the opportunity to be your own person, to reinvent yourself, like, But for him, it's like, as long as his dad's, like, as long as he's caught up in the Hudson family, like, because he's like, your dad's going to go to wage. He's like, yeah, but my dad's got in his ear, like, whispering in other people's ears to the point, like, he'll most likely not go down. And it's like, well, you can take him down. But for Ryan, it's like, if I do that, I'll basically blow up the entire Hudson family fortune. What I'm going to do, like, work at a coffee shop or something? Because I think for him, it's like, all he knows how to be is a rich kid. So he doesn't have any skills outside of that. So it's like, what am I going to do? I mean, I guess you could try to legitimize a lot of the terrible stuff that your dad done to try and like, but I guess it's like the moment he goes down, any business and money they have will go down too. So there's no like, but I guess it's like he can apply some of the stuff that he knows business-wise, but I guess maybe he doesn't really know too much business-wise. Regardless, Nancy's on the inside meeting with Hannah. It's like, oh, I need more sand. And obviously Nancy looks and sees that the library, that place is holding like a lot of like supernatural objects, which Hannah was like, don't look at it. She's like, no, maybe we could use some of that stuff. It's like, no, because we have no idea, like, yeah, it might help your situation, but you don't know what the ramifications of that could be. Like, it could make things much worse. So I don't have any sand here. I can't help you. It's like, I mean, it's understandable. It's like, I get it. You're desperate, but none of this is going to help you. It's potentially going to make things worse. But as Nancy's leaving, she sees Ryan's car. She's like, oh boy. But then remembers like, wait, my hair, it turned to sand. It's most likely in, okay, maybe there's still some last hope. And I love the situation of just like Ryan and Carson try to put on their seatbelts and just like, hey, we're not stalking you, just legally, like, following you to keep an eye on you. It's like, oh, where are your parents and everything? It's like, yeah, why is your car so clean? It's like, I vacuum. It's like, well, where's your vacuum? It's in my truck. You keep your vacuum in your truck? He's like, yeah, that's not weird. It's not weird, is it? And did you have Carson be like, no, I have a dustbuster, in mine. And I'm like I said, I love this like buddy team that we got going on. I'm loving that that's turning in more and more of a thing. I'm like, oh, you would never thought their relationship would be that, considering everything last season, but also like even when things started with Ryan threatening him, but it's like, oh, maybe we're going to be on better terms, so that's cool. But luckily, and I love Ryan being like, oh, you want one? I'll get one for you. She's like, no, I'm good. And stop following me, please. And she divides up the sand so that everyone can protect themselves. Because the plan is, and because I thought this was interesting, because when Nick and Ace were talking, it's like, yeah, this is a picture, which I think this is an effed up thing, but I think there actually some validity to it. I think this actually, I mean, it's a site you don't want to go on. But like there's the whole 4chan situation. There's also the other Chan that you don't want to go on either. That apparently, I think that's on the more darker side of the web, which I'm unfamiliar with. But I'm like, I'm fine not knowing about that side of the web. But basically, like 4chan, he was like, yeah, there's a picture of AJ's dead body, and like people are trying to figure out what the shadowy thing is in the background, and it's like, oh, it ended up being the Igleka. So it's like, so the Igleka comes to claim your soul personally, because Ace was like, yeah, I kind of thought it was going to be kind of like a mob hit type of situation, like simultaneously. So it's going to come at us one at a time. So we have to be prepared, like, so it's going to come after us in a specific order. So that was kind of an interesting development to think like, oh, this is something supernatural. So, but I guess because it's a I'm claiming your soul thing, I can't just do it all at once. I need to kind of come at you one at a time. And that ends up being part of Nancy's plan of like, everyone come locked and loaded with your sand, get ready for a fight. The Glaker shows up, you throw, like, whoever it is first up, you gotta wound it. Like, this might be our opportunity to try and kill the Glaker. So everyone's kind of getting prepared, because this is kind of like their last opportunity to kind of make some headway in the situation. So, but I think the Glaker, I think she starts the attack, but the actual death blow and taking of your soul, she can only do that one at a time. But it seems like she's able, because like everything kind of starts going, like the fire with but even before I even get to that, like obviously it was a sweet moment of them all kind of calling each other, because obviously Bess calls up Nick, and then they call up Ace, and then they Patchy and Nancy, and they're all talking and kind of apologizing, because it's like, yeah, we weren't on the best of terms, and luckily we're all alive, but it's like we don't know how this is all going to end. So any regrets. Ace ends up talking about why he broke into the FBI. He was looking for someone that said witness protection, but he's like, I wasn't brave enough to call the person. I was wondering what that was about. I think he's talked about his mom being gone. I think she might have passed away. I don't remember. No, his mom hasn't passed away, because I forgot. She works at the library, doesn't she? Or wasn't that the whole thing? Or maybe she did work at the library and she is going now. I don't remember. Has any reference library stuff about his mom? So she is still alive, right? I think. It might be a thing that his mom and dad are split up. I don't remember. I feel like he's definitely referenced his mom in the library, but I can't remember if I think she's still alive. I could be but that's what I was wondering, if it was that type of situation. But I was, like I said, I didn't think about that. But we'll get answers to that. We get answers to that later on. It was an interesting development to find out, he actually has, he's like, yeah, I think I'm your brother. So it's like, oh, you have a sister in witness protection. What's that about? Is that kind of in reference to maybe your mom, maybe it's in a affair situation, maybe it's an older sibling that maybe they had to give away for adoption or something. I'm curious what the circumstances are around that, but I was like, oh, that's interesting. Obviously you can tell that's going to turn into a full-blown storyline. I'm curious to see what that turns into, but other than that, so Ace brings that up, and you have Bess kind of apologizing about yeah, I'm sorry I stole your knife. And he's like, what? You took, what was, I forgot he named the knife something. It's like, I also stole this skull bracelet from you, George. And she's like, yeah, I already know. And Nick, I took your keys. I mean, I didn't really take the keys. I just took the ring part. She's like, I kind of got an issue where when I'm kind of feeling bad, I steal stuff. Obviously, she's a little bit of a kleptomaniac when it comes to shiny stuff. And she's like, if this is all when this is all said and done, if we end up surviving this, I will stop. And they're like, feeling bad or stealing stuff? And she's like, both, actually. And so everyone's working through their regrets. Nick is worried about, for him, it's hey, I didn't do the last thing Tiffany wanted me to do and use that flash drive to take down the Hudson. It's he didn't want to be put himself out there to kind of be, I think, caught up, because if he did, the Hudsons could end up destroying him. And it's I just want to take this opportunity to rebuild my life, co-own a business with someone, be in love, and that could all be jeopardized if he went up against the Hudsons. He didn't want to put himself out on a ledge in that regard, and he kind of regrets that. George saying she has no regrets, because despite everything, it's all that, the complicated stuff has also brought good in her life. So it's for Nancy, and it comes down to Nancy, and Nancy apologizes, I'm not the best leader considering I brought you all into this, and I'm sorry. She's she almost kind of throws it back to, hey, me being a Hudson actually kind of fits in my DNA of kind of, using people and kind of casting them aside. But, Bess being no, I believe you, Nancy, that you're sincere about your apology, and but then the Glaker strikes everybody. Like I said, it strikes at once because Bess is on fire. The hook attacks Ace, but the main person she's going after first is George and Nick. I wonder, is it specifically them both together, or if they were separate, would it have been? But I mean, I guess it's they died in division, so it was going to be coming stronger together rather than apart. But Because I was wondering, like, because I had thought, like, when she disappeared, somehow she was going to push their car into the water, and that's how the water was going to get inside. But I also forget, that is kind of a bit of a supernatural thing, because a fire just pops out of nowhere and attacking Bess, and the Hook just moving on its own. Nancy kind of falls off the cliff, but luckily grabs on. When she was screaming for help, I was hoping, like, oh, like actually Ryan and her dad were following her, and, you know, were able to save her. But luckily she was able to kind of rise up on her own. But, Nick had thrown the sand at the Igleka, and water just suddenly appeared, and luckily they were able to get out of the truck, but she was kind of drowning on her own, and it's like, okay, I think we did it. They all reunite. It's like, hey, we're all alive. Like, who did the honors? It's like, yeah, we did it. Yeah, let's celebrate. I was like, there's still a lot of time in this episode. Is it really done? Oh, no, it's done. And they all see a vision of themselves dead in the restaurant. It's like, oh, no more one at a time. She's coming at us full force. It's like, so what do we do now, Nancy? It's like, it's saying it didn't work. If anything, it just pissed her off even more. And Nancy's like, I don't know. They're literally only got like 3 hours until midnight. So, you know, and that's where everyone respectively tries to, you know, go do their thing. Nick meets with Ryan, hands him the flash drive, and it's like, you know, I could just get rid of this and bury it. It's like, yes, but it's a copy. But also, you want a relationship with Nancy, and you want to show her that you're good, so you could start by doing this. And he's like, I won't make any promises. And he says, yeah, but think about it. Maybe tomorrow things will be different. I think he's kind of implying, like, if we all end up dead, maybe you doing the right thing might kind of circle back around, you know? Like I brought up, Ace is talking to his potential sister, or at least leaving a voicemail. And then, like, Bess and George, because George, you know, and that was actually a really sweet moment with George where she talked about, like, what her sisters would be doing right now. And for her, it's like, they think I'm working right now. And for her, it's like those special moments. It's like, I don't want to ruin that. Because if I go there, I'm going to ruin these little rituals of, like, she knows exactly what her sisters are doing right now. So it's like, I don't want to ruin that moment with my stuff. And it's like, Bess, I can always drop you off to the Marvins, you know, so you can be with your family. She's like, no, I kind of already am. And you're like, oh, it's sweet. And she's going in for a hug. And George is like, I'm not hugging you. I mean, like, nice way to kill the mood, George. We're literally hours from death, and you couldn't even give that to Bess? Come on. Nancy spent time with her dad, and it's just like, hey, I just want things to kind of be what they were, especially because in this moment, I need you to be the dad that I loved and trusted in and believed in. But he's like, I'm sorry that, you know, you can't really get that back. But she's like, you know, everything we had was a lie. It's like, yeah, but the love wasn't. But for her, it's like, how can you say that? It's like the moment, you know, the moment. And I think that's so sad that, like, in Nancy's mind, I guess it makes sense because, like, that love was never real because our entire family situation, we're not even blood related, we're not really family, like, because I think maybe almost in her mind, it's almost like I was pushed onto you. It's not like you necessarily took me because you wanted to, but it's like, Carson didn't have to listen to what Lucy said, but I think it's like, probably in Nancy's mind, it's like, it was a woman's dying wish, like, so, of course you're going to do that, but for him, it's like, we loved you. Like, you know, it's like, regardless of what our situation is from now on, that love will always be true. Whether our relationship involves you know, it being a father-daughter thing, or whether it be a Nancy and Carson thing, that love for you will always be there, you know? But in that moment, Nancy's got thinking about it, love, and she's about to leave, but it ends up saying, I love you, Dad, you know, and hugs him, and it's like, I gotta go. Because once again, she has a lot of regrets about how this whole situation ended up playing out. And it's like, especially if she knows she's hours from death. But in that moment, she returns with the letters and gathers everyone around. We've been going about this the wrong way. All we've been trying to do against her has been using what pain and torture she went through. Like, all the porents are just all the things that killed her. Like, we're literally attacking her with trauma rather than attacking her with the opposite of it, love. Like, remembering in that moment, like, she almost became human again. It's like, we have to remind her of the human that she is. Tap into Odette instead of the Igleka. And so they're reading through the letters a little bit. I thought that would kind of play a role, but I thought it would have been a thing of, like, maybe they find the descendant of the English woman. Granted, they don't have enough time. I don't know if there'll still be kind of room for that, considering everything, but we'll get to that in a second. So when it was all said and done, though, they're going through the letter. I was even interested finding out, like, oh, she's not the biggest fan of water, but she made the voyage because she was trying to meet up with the English woman, hoping, like, oh, they could start a new life together, you know? She was willing to take this journey despite kind of not being a big fan of open water and stuff like that, just so that she could be with the person. She, the journey gave her courage. So they tried to use the letters against her when the time came. It was also interesting too, finding out that Nick knows French too, because he was like, oh yeah, like the Count, I think it was like, he specifically was referencing like the Count of Monte Cristo and everything, and it's just kind of like, oh, this is a desperate measure, but for them it's like, yeah, it's all we have. It's literally the only weapon we haven't used in this battle. And so when the time comes, they try reading the letters, but she's in the process of killing them regardless. But I think what Nancy was trying to explain is like, speak those words, but speak them from the heart. Don't just read them. There's no emotion behind it. It's the love and the emotion. It coming from the heart is what matters. And they were luckily able to reach her at the end, and she became Odette again. And it's like, we see you. We know all the pain and terrible things that would happen. You aren't the terrible things that they did to you. You are human. We see you. We aren't forgetting like who you were and like what you went through and what they took from you. So kind of showing like you aren't forgotten. And in that moment, Odette, shines this light bright and then like disappear. The way Steph was shaking, I was like, oh boy. And the moment they were slow about panning around, I was like, oh God, did someone get it? Please don't. And it turns out it's George, and it's like, well, of course, the bucket situation. I was like, no. I was like, come on, we literally came out on the other side of this. This sucks. And then just in that moment, George literally dies in Nick's arms. And Nancy's trying to remember, she's like, I can't let her die. Because I think in Nancy's mind, a multitude of things. One, I think, losing anyone that you're close to, because regardless of anything, you and George are friends. She'd probably fight back against it, but you are good friends. You weren't always on the best of terms, but you are now. And so even that's complicated because it's George. But they are friends. She's also, having lost her mom, like I think not just one but two moms. The one that took her in, and also finding out, oh, your real mom died years ago. Like I think that, but I think a big chunk of it could also be, hey, I'm the reason why you guys got dragged into this. If I were to die, that's one thing, but I can't let one of you die for my mistakes. So she busts into that place, ends up breaking into the boxes to get because she remembered there being a shroud, like, hey, you put this over someone and they'll come back from the dead, which Hannah catches her. Is like, Nancy, what are you doing? She's like, I'm sorry, I can't let her die. Luckily she gets back there in time. I mean, she's already dead, but luckily Nancy places a shroud on her, and it's like, oh, come on. And it's like, yeah, George is back. And she's like, whoa. Personal space, Drew. So it's like, hey. And even Hannah had said when she left, like, we don't know what the ramifications, we don't know what will be the price to pay for you using these, And so luckily, George is back. So it's like, it worked out, able to kind of let loose a sigh of relief, because it's like, hey, everything worked out. We're alive. No murder mystery. No ghosts. We're no longer cursed. A Glaca or blood bucket wise. So it's like, oh, it's all good. Then we see that scene with George. Now, I'm assuming that's implying that. I don't think that's implying like, oh, Odette possessed her. I think they're co-opting the body. I mean, the same thing kind of happened with when Tiffany possessed George before. So I think it's a similar thing of them holding the same body, but I think Odette might be like buried deep within, or it's insinuating that Odette hasn't completely gone away, that now the restaurant, she's kind of haunting it. I don't know which I'm leaning more towards the former, but it could be the latter, she's just haunting the place. But like George singing in French like that makes me think she's probably doing that subconsciously, so there's some part of Odette there. Like, I think George's dead body presented an opportunity for Odette, but I think in that moment, like her coming back, like Odette like probably got locked into her body too. Or maybe it's a byproduct of the shroud. We don't know. So there's that. But then there's also the ending of like her, Nancy walking, and then like all the drawers or all those lock boxes opening. Because I was about to say, like, Nancy did like cut the power to all those. So like one opened and she got the shroud, but who knows, whatever else was sealed away, like those boxes being open like that and left open. Because it looked like Hannah didn't have time to really, I mean, it was like a couple hours, so she didn't have time to like repair everything. So it looks like a whole bunch of stuff got released, which immediately, considering the nature of this kind of being a little Scooby-Doo-ish, which isn't a bad thing. I'm just comparing like, oh, a group of teenagers essentially like solving crimes, like, very Scooby-Doo like. Kind of reminds me of the 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo, you know, that element. If you're unfamiliar with that cartoon, literally Scooby and Shaggy and Scrappy, if I remember correctly. I think I can't remember if that was one of the continuities where Shaggy had a girlfriend, because there was some of those Scooby-Doo movies where Shaggy had a girlfriend. She might have been the same one in 13, like the one where he was a werewolf and they had to race against all the other monsters. He had a girlfriend in that. I don't remember if he had a girlfriend in 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo. Maybe not. Once again, I'm overthinking things. It doesn't really matter. I mean, it's actually interesting because like let's not forget this is under the because this is on the CW. It is kind of under the Warner Brothers umbrella, you know, so regardless, like I said, I'm going on a tangent, stuff like that. But nevertheless, geez, it seems like obviously a lot more spirits have been released, and Nancy's like, did you hear that? So it's like, yep, dealt with one situation. I figured as much. I wasn't expecting this to be the outcome, because I figured Nancy might turn to like those objects, whatever she read about from Hannah. Like, I thought she would use those at the end, but for her to come up with the letter situation, I was like, there's got to be something more to that. Like, for her not to have used those, that's why I was surprised. But it's like, nope, it came back around with her having to resurrect George. I'm like, and there we go. Like, there's no way they're going to leave that huge plot opportunity right there to be like, oh, we introduced something that could be some major plot development in a detrimental way for our characters. Of course, you're going to you got to set up the next arc of the season, because I didn't talk about it, but this definitely feels like this. Because I guess I would have been under the impression it would have been 22 episodes last season, I guess, with this. I mean, to be fair, once again, it's shows that are weird, because some will stop at 22, others will do 23. But I with the nature of this episode and just how everything plays out, I feel like this would have been the original season finale. I'm assuming it would have been like 23 episodes. I would have assumed 22, but this doesn't seem like a season premiere type of episode. This feels more like a season finale. But once again, just structuring the season, it feels like that could be the case, but maybe it isn't. But regardless, like I said, we've already kind of set up our next arc of like, yep, we're going to get a lot more ghost stuff, plus whatever the full effects of. I mean, obviously someone coming back from the dead like that, probably on its own, it's probably not the best thing. We don't know what that did to George, you know. I'm sure that comes with its own ramifications. Maybe the ramifications don't necessarily stem from you just coming back to life, but more specifically how you came back to life, like that shroud, like. And once again, this whole Odette thing, like, I don't think we're completely done with that. So, a lot of angles. Obviously, you know, picking up the storylines of like where, you know, obviously George and Nick continuing their relationship and any effects of what George is going through and what kind of effects that's ultimately going to have on her and, you know, their relationship. Nancy dealing with the whole, hey, my dad situation. What that necessarily would translate to, especially if Ryan's doing all he can to try and take down his dad. Ace, that's potential sister storyline, as well as Bess' whole situation with the Marvins in general, but also, well, she kind of stood her girlfriend up last time, like when she wanted to meet her parents. So it's like, granted, you thought you want to die, you didn't want to kind of put Elizabeth through that, but it's still kind of like, you know, where they stand, where things stand in general with the Marvins in general for Bess in the grand scheme of things, especially because in her final moment she'd rather be with her friends who are more family to her than the Marvins. So I think that in itself speaks volumes. But yeah, like I said, I'm really interested to see where all this takes us, and like I said, going into this next arc, you know, for the next course of the season, you know. So, but really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.